From the frozen tundra of the Arctic to the towering peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, the Russian landscape has long been shaped by the forces of nature and the ambitions of man. Today we turn our attention to a leader whose impact on this vast nation, and indeed the world, has been nothing short of profound: Vladimir Putin. Over more than 2 decades, Putin's reign has been marked by a series of conflicts, each leaving an indelible mark on the geopolitical landscape. In this documentary, we journey through time to examine the defining chapters of Putin's warpath, delving into the historical context, the key players, and the lasting consequences of these conflicts. From the battle-scarred streets of Grozny to the sun-drenched shores of Crimea, we uncover the motivations and the methods behind Putin's use of military force. Join us as we navigate the complex web of international relations, regional power struggles, and the human cost of war. This is not just a story of tanks and troops, but of shattered lives, broken families, and the enduring quest for peace in a world teetering on the brink. The story of Putin's warpath begins with a tremor that shook the Chechen Republic in the waning days of the 20th century. The year was 1999. Boris Yeltsin, the first president of the Russian Federation, was nearing the end of his tumultuous reign. Into this vacuum stepped a relatively unknown figure, Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer with a steely gaze and an air of quiet determination. Putin inherited a conflict rooted in Chechnya's long and bloody struggle for independence. The First Chechen War had ended in a humiliating defeat for Russia, leaving the region in a state of fragile autonomy. Putin was determined to reassert Moscow's control and crush the Chechen resistance. Under the pretext of fighting terrorism, Russian forces launched a massive air and ground offensive, targeting key Chechen cities, including the capital, Grozny. The assault was relentless, reducing Grozny to rubble and displacing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Putin's star began to rise. He presented himself as a decisive leader, a strongman who would not hesitate to use force to defend Russia's interests. His approval rating soared as he vowed to crush the Chechen rebels and restore order to the troubled region. By 2000, the fighting had largely subsided, with Russia claiming victory. Chechnya was placed under the iron-fisted rule of Akhmad Kadyrov, a former rebel leader who had switched sides and pledged loyalty to Moscow. The war had achieved Putin's objective of crushing the Chechen resistance and reasserting Russian control over the region, but at a terrible cost. 5 years after the Second Chechen War, the world watched as Putin's Russia flexed its military muscle in the small Caucasus nation of Georgia. The stage for this conflict was set in the breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The seeds of the Russo-Georgian War were sown in the chaos that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Both South Ossetia and Abkhazia had broken away from Georgia in the early 1990s. Russia supported the separatist movements, providing military aid and stationing peacekeeping forces. In August 2008, tensions erupted into open warfare. Skirmishes escalated, prompting a full-scale Russian military intervention. Tanks rolled across the border, and the Georgian army was outmatched. Russian forces seized control of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, threatening Tbilisi. The 5-day war left hundreds dead and thousands displaced. The international community condemned Russia's actions. For Putin, the war was a resounding victory. Russia recognized the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, dealing a blow to Georgia's NATO aspirations. The world watched in astonishment as a new chapter unfolded in Putin's warpath, this time in the sun-drenched peninsula of Crimea. A place of strategic importance and historical significance, Crimea, with its predominantly Russian-speaking population, had been a part of Ukraine since the Soviet era. But in 2014, under the cover of unrest and political upheaval in Ukraine, Russia orchestrated a bloodless takeover, annexing the peninsula and sparking international condemnation. The roots of the crisis lay in the Maidan Revolution, a popular uprising in Ukraine that toppled the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych. Seizing on the chaos and instability, Russia moved swiftly to exploit the situation. Unidentified troops, later revealed to be Russian special forces, fanned out across Crimea, seizing key infrastructure, government buildings and military bases. A hastily organized referendum, widely condemned as illegitimate by the international community, was held with the predictable result. An overwhelming majority of Crimeans voted to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. Moscow wasted no time in formally annexing Crimea, incorporating the peninsula into the Russian Federation. The annexation of Crimea sent shockwaves through the international community, drawing widespread condemnation and triggering a series of sanctions against Russia. For Putin, the annexation of Crimea was a strategic and symbolic victory, securing Russia's access to the Black Sea and bolstering his domestic popularity. The move was met with widespread jubilation within Russia, with many hailing Putin as a hero who had restored Russian pride and righting a historical wrong. As the world grappled with the implications of the Crimean annexation, a new conflict was brewing in eastern Ukraine, the war in Donbass. This time, the battlefield was the industrial heartland of eastern Ukraine, a region with close cultural and linguistic ties to Russia. Emboldened by the success of the Crimean annexation, pro-Russian separatists, armed and supported by Moscow, launched uprisings in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of eastern Ukraine, collectively known as Donbass. These separatists declared independence, proclaiming the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Ukraine, its military still reeling from years of neglect and corruption, found itself ill-prepared to counter the separatist offensive. The rebels, backed by Russian weapons, training and even active-duty soldiers operating covertly, made steady gains, seizing control of key towns and cities. The conflict in Donbass quickly escalated into a full-blown war, a grinding attritional struggle fought in the trenches amidst the ruins of once thriving industrial cities. Artillery duels, sniper fire and tank battles became a grim daily reality for the people trapped in the crossfire. The world watched in horror as the conflict claimed thousands of lives, both military and civilian. Homes were destroyed, families were torn apart, and the once vibrant industrial heartland of Ukraine was transformed into a desolate wasteland. The war in Donbass became a frozen conflict, a stalemate with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. The conflict also further poisoned relations between Russia and the West, reinforcing the perception of Russia as an aggressor nation willing to use military force and covert operations to achieve its geopolitical objectives. As the world's attention remained fixed on the unfolding crisis in Ukraine, Putin's Russia shifted focus to Syria. In 2015, with the Syrian civil war raging, Russia launched a military intervention with far-reaching consequences. The Syrian civil war, sparked by the Arab Spring, had become a brutal conflict with warring factions, foreign interventions, and humanitarian catastrophe. Assad's regime used brutal tactics, bombing civilian areas and using chemical weapons, displacing millions. Russia, a long-standing ally, intervened as the Syrian army faced collapse. In September 2015, Russian warplanes began airstrikes in Syria. The intervention tipped the balance in favor of Assad. Russian air power and Syrian ground offensives regained lost territory. The intervention had a profound impact, securing Assad's grip on power. For Putin, it was a strategic masterstroke, reasserting Russia as a major player in the Middle East. The intervention also showcased Russia's advanced weaponry and tactics. The world watched in disbelief as a new chapter unfolded in Putin's warpath, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This was not a surgical strike like Crimea, nor a proxy war like Donbass. This was a full-fledged invasion, a land war in Europe on a scale not seen since World War II. Tensions had been simmering for months, with Russia amassing troops along Ukraine's borders. Despite diplomatic efforts, on February 24, 2022, Russian forces launched a multi-pronged assault on Ukraine. Tanks rolled across the border, missiles rained down, and the world watched in horror. The invasion triggered international condemnation and a wave of sanctions against Russia. Western nations imposed unprecedented economic penalties on Russia. The Ukrainian people responded with defiance and determination. Ordinary citizens took up arms, forming defense units to resist the Russian advance. The Ukrainian military put up a fierce resistance, inflicting heavy casualties. The invasion has had a devastating impact on Ukraine. Cities have been reduced to rubble, millions displaced, and the death toll mounts. The conflict has disrupted supply chains, fueled inflation, and exacerbated food shortages. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine is a tragedy for Ukraine, Russia, and the world. It is a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the dangers of unchecked aggression. As we've journeyed through the tumultuous chapters of Putin's warpath, from the battle-scarred streets of Grozny to the shattered cities of Ukraine, one thing becomes abundantly clear: the human cost of conflict is immeasurable. Each conflict, each act of aggression leaves behind a trail of shattered lives, broken families, and a profound sense of loss. What will be the final chapter in Putin's story? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the world will forever be marked by the consequences of his actions. The scars of conflict run deep, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the urgent need for diplomacy, dialogue, and a commitment to a world where differences are resolved through words, not weapons. Subscribe for more videos on notorious figures in history. Until next time.